Hello and welcome to the History of Philosophy in China by Peter Adamson and Karen Lai, brought to you with the support of the Philosophy Department at King's College London and the LMU in Munich. Online at historyofphilosophy.net. Today's episode, A Black and White World, the Zhuangzi on Shi-Fei Dogmatism. Do people on the political right and those on the political left have much in common? Do they have anything in common? Ardent defenders on both sides of the political spectrum are apt to answer this question with a resounding no. Political disputes are now reflected in further disagreements on a wide range of other topics, from climate to gender, from vaccines to the very question of what it means to live well. One might go so far as to say that Americans are living through their own period of the Warring States. In texts from Warring States China, disagreement is also palpable. We've already seen disputes between early Confucians and the Moists, and how the Laozi moves away from both traditions. The Zhuangzi explicitly names the Moists and the Confucians as being at loggerheads, suggesting that they'll never see eye to eye. Tao subscribes to petty successes, and words rely on pomposity. Therefore, we have the yeas and the nays of the Confucians and the Moists. Each affirms what the other denies, and each denies what the other affirms. The Zhuangzi is critical of the Daos, the ways, promoted by each set of thinkers. As the Zhuangzi sees it, their Daos are pretty shallow. And it's not only that, it sounds as if these rival schools have descended into argument for argument's sake, losing sight of the important matters of right and wrong they're meant to be discussing. To a 21st century audience, this may sound all too familiar. What is right, Shi, and what is wrong, Fei, has particular significance in the Zhuangzi. These two terms, Shi and Fei, can simply mean right and wrong, or they can mean getting things right or wrong. The authors of this text were not the only ones interested in that contrast. We noted in episode 30 that the word Fei appears in Gongsun Long's White Horse, Not Horse dialogue, and also saw the later Moists developing a whole theory of argumentation for the sake of getting things right. The later Moists, in fact, promoted the sort of behavior lamented here in the Zhuangzi, with the Confucians and Moists fighting it out by affirming and denying views. In the latter sections of the Mozi, we find a defense of disputation as an important way to establish who is right. The things something is called are either the same or different. In a case where they're the same, one side calls it dog, the other calls it hound. In a case where they're different, one side calls it ox, the other calls it horse. Disputation is when one side calls it this, the other calls it not, and the one that fits wins. When two people hold diametrically opposing views, the winner is one whose words fit. This means that the words align with the facts of the world, offering what we might call a naive realist view of the meanings of words. Despite the talk of winning, this picture of disputation sounds rather cooperative. The parties to the debate will achieve greater clarity by sorting out what each word means. The Zhuangzi, by contrast, is alive to the competitive mindset that drives debate and which can often lead to bitterness and rancor. Again, the pairing of Shi and Fei is relevant here, since these words can indicate a person's attitude towards their own beliefs. Chad Hansen, a scholar of Taoist philosophy, describes Shi and Fei as pro and con attitudes. The Zhuangzi presents a vivid image of people caught up in the quest to prove themselves right. There are those whose utterances are like arrows from a bow, who feel it their charge to pronounce what is right and what is wrong. There are those who, as if guided by a covenant, are determined to overcome. The metaphor of an arrow evokes the idea of a target, and the target seems to be not so much clarity or truth as victory. Where the later Moist discussion focuses on dialectical process, the Zhuangzi foregrounds the question of motivation. This competitive way of thinking is expressed through a coupling of our two words to form the compound Shi-Fei. This compound is not merely the sum of its two components, Shi and Fei. It refers to a mindset that drives both relentless determination to prove one is right and hostility to the views of the other. There are various possible translations of Shi-Fei, but they coalesce around the idea of a culture that seeks to settle life's important questions through disputation. Shi-Fei may also be applied to individuals, that is, people who have the disputatious mindset or who promote such an approach, or who uphold a single set of values that they want everyone to embrace. The Zhuangzi expresses its concerns about Shi-Fei using a notion we've encountered before in Confucianism, the heart mind, or xin. This is the organ or capacity for moral decision-making recognized in the early Confucian texts, especially the Mengzi and the Xunzi. The Xunzi, in particular, discusses many practices and processes for developing the heart mind, allowing a person to overcome their inborn bad nature so as to engage fluently and spontaneously in practices that contribute to the socio-political good. Following this line of thinking, Zhuangzi sees the heart mind as the center of Shifei. In the same passage that speaks of a person's utterances shooting forth like arrows, we find a characterization of defending one's own views and denying others' views as struggles of the heart mind. The Zhuangzi also calls a heart mind that is fixated on its own views completed. Although this phrase, completed heart mind, qiangxin, only appears once in the Zhuangzi, it is nested among passages that discuss the culture of Shifei. We get examples of what it means to have this kind of heart mind. There is Zhao Wen, the lute player, Xi Kuang, the music master, and Huizi, the disputer. Each was highly accomplished in his chosen field. They delighted in their activities, and observing that this delight of theirs was not shared, they wanted to shine its light and make it obvious to others. These men are well-meaning, enthusiastic in sharing what they do well, but they're nevertheless imposing their enjoyment on others. This is the kind of approach we might nowadays call controlling. However good their intentions, they fail to understand that not everyone will value what they happen to value. The scholar Joanna Guzowska proposes that we understand the moral role of the heart mind in the Zhuangzi as a kind of gatekeeper. That is, it takes each matter and distinguishes it as shi or fei. It is, as Guzowska says, informed by an entrenched distinction pattern. It makes decisions about what's out and what's in, who belongs and who doesn't. She also applies a spatial metaphor of fullness and bulk to characterize the completed heart mind. As it is already filled with its own vision for humanity, there is no room for anything more. This image of the heart mind that is complete in itself stands in contrast to the Zhuangzi's perspectivism, which we looked at in the previous episode, and which encourages its readers to take on other points of view. The Zhuangzi often uses animal figures to make its point, allowing readers to distance themselves from these figures, finding them both humorous and not like us. Yet when we ponder the stories, we begin to realize that sometimes those animal figures do represent us humans. In the last episode, we briefly considered the fantastical large bird, Peng, who flies at 90,000 miles high. We mentioned that the cicada and the little dove mock Peng. They say, "We scurry up into the air, leaping from the elm to the sandalwood tree, and when we don't quite make it, we just plummet to the ground. What's all this about ascending 90,000 miles and heading south?" It's not clear whether the cicada or the little dove makes this comment, but it's implied that they both share this view. As readers, we see how they simply cannot grasp Peng or its lofty perspective. They do know something, namely what they themselves are capable of doing. They even know the limits of their capabilities. What they lack is an understanding of any way of life, any Tao, that is not just like their own. To put this in a slightly different way, these little creatures understand their limits, but they don't understand that they're in fact limited by what they know. By that measure, Peng's flying so high is denied. It is fei, or wrong. It should be increasingly clear that the Zhuangzi is not a relativist text. It deems the black and white, wrong and right, shifei worldview itself to be wrong. It is in some sense a skeptical text, as we've seen, but not a text that refuses to take a view on any issue. This is confirmed by another story in the work, involving a high-ranking official and a seabird, which happened to come to roost at the outskirts of Lu, the official's town. Though the story doesn't say this, it's perhaps because the bird is rare, or such a bird coming to roost near Lu is rare, that the official gives it special treatment. He takes the bird in his chariot to the temple, where ritual music is performed, and feeds it with meat and wine. The bird appears distressed, and sadly dies after 3 days. The story ends with a contrastive picture of how birds live. Those who wanted to nourish a bird with what is nourishing to the bird would let it perch in the deep forest, roam over the altars and plains, float on the rivers and lakes, gorge itself on eels and minnows, fly in formation to wherever it stops, and find its place willy-nilly wherever it wants. As this translation by Zipperin nicely captures, the passage conveys a sense of spontaneity. The bird chooses whether to perch, roam, float, or fly. Of course, we don't want to overplay the idea that birds are self-aware in their choices, and in any case, that's not the Zhuangzi's point. It is rather that the bird does as it does. It has no fixed destination, taking its place wherever it wants, in forests, over altars and plains, and on rivers and lakes. Zipporin's choice of words willy-nilly effectively carries the idea of just being in the moment. The passage refers to the birds roaming or wandering over altars and plains as a metaphor for a journey without a fixed destination. Decisions about what to do and where to go are made as they encountered the world in their travels. This way of life, this Tao, is markedly different from what the official had in mind for the bird. The Zhuangzi says that he was trying to use what was nourishing to himself to nourish the bird, instead of using what was nourishing to the bird. The official is well-intentioned, ironically but inappropriately providing the bird with the highest human forms of expression, religious ritual, music, and the best culinary experience. This is what comes of having a completed heart-mind. To fully appreciate this story, readers are required to adopt two different perspectives, those of the official and of the seabird. We understand the benevolent motivation of the official, but also the suffering of the seabird. So the idea of wandering has a dual role in the story. The reader is asked to wander between the perspectives, much as a happy bird would wander freely through nature. The longer passage in which this story appears helps us understand why the Zhuangzi finds existing approaches to government so problematic. The passage focuses on Confucian teachings, noting that Yan Yuan, Kongzi's favored follower, was teaching the Taos of revered Confucian figures, including the sages Yao and Shun. Which is hardly a surprise. We know that the Confucians promoted the ways of the sage kings and teachers as moral exemplars. But the Zhuangzi depicts this as problematic. Kongzi is shown as being deeply worried about Yan Yuan's approach. Kongzi's role as the founder of the Confucian tradition has been appropriated and inverted in this passage. As we'll see in a later episode, this is not an exceptional case. The Zhuangzi sometimes uses Kongzi as a spokesperson for its own insights, and sometimes critiques him as the venerable founder of the Confucian tradition. Our present passage falls into the former category. Kongzi is convinced that when Yan Yuan seeks to impart Confucian wisdom to a certain official, the result will be utter failure. The problem is not that the official will reject the Confucian teachings, but to the contrary, that he will adhere to them dogmatically. Hence, Kongzi narrates the story of the unfortunate seabird. Yan Yuan is falling into the same trap, obtusely unable to see beyond his own perspective, clinging to a single Tao that he supposes to hold for all time and for all people. Instead, the Zhuangzi recommends a flexible approach, which is responsive to different capabilities and needs. This very Zhuangzian lesson is what we should learn from the ancient sages, who, it says, did not require the same ability of everyone, did not assign everyone the same tasks. They titled people only according to their actual abilities, and the duties they imposed were set up to suit what was appropriate to each. The sage king, Yao, so often held up as an exemplary leader in Confucian texts, is singled out as representing the way Confucianism is entrenched in a bygone era. In one story, a Taoist recluse named Shu Yu is fleeing from Yao. When asked to explain why, Shu Yu specifically mentions Yao's intention to instill benevolence and rightness, two fundamental Confucian virtues. For one thing, it's easy to fake such behaviors, and more importantly, Yao is presumptuous to think he can rule a country in this way. Shu Yu says, "For any one man to benefit the world with his decisions and institutions can be likened to trying to carve out the shapes of all things with a single slash of the knife." The imagery is striking, bringing out not only the clean cut made by a knife, but also its thoroughness. In one single act, Yao single-handedly installs the standard of virtue for all. The language of the Zhuangzi brings out the unambiguous, definitive nature of the cut, whereby Yao imposes his values on the people. Shu Yu continues his critique by saying that Yao understands how worthy people profit the world, but he doesn't understand how they plunder the world. Yao has stolen from the people by depriving them of the opportunity to exercise initiative. Though Zhuangzian sages would make value judgments, for instance by critiquing those who inflict their worldviews on others, they would not engage in the black and white thinking called shi fei. A sage would sometimes call things shi or fei, but without adopting any rigidity as to the right course in life. The sage's flexibility is compared to being on a rotating pivot, so as never to be permanently lodged in any one position. The Zhuangzi wants its readers to do likewise, first adopting one perspective, then another. The rotation of the metaphor represents the capacity to engage with and respond limitlessly to other points of view. The Zhuangzi writes as follows: "A state where this and not this, right and wrong, are no longer coupled as opposites is called the pivot of Tao. With its axis at the center, it responds endlessly to all things, for it can respond limitlessly to the rights and limitlessly to the wrongs. Thus, I say, nothing compares to illumination." Earlier, we considered how Guzovska describes the heart-mind of those who engage with Shi-Fei discourse in terms of fullness and bulk. She suggests that the heart-mind of a sage is instead characterized by emptiness and lack of bulk. The sage's heart-mind is empty because it is not filled out with views the sage seeks to promote. There are no targets embraced by Zhuangzi sages. They do not believe they're charged with a mission to protect and preach their own views. At the end of this same passage, the sage's flexibility is characterized as illumination. It allows for a broader vision, which sees each Shi-Fei view as only one of many possible perspectives. By contrast, those who promote their particular set of Shi-Fei values believe that theirs is the only perspective worth holding. Imagine having a conversation with a person whose views are illuminated in this way. Because they don't stubbornly cling on to any one way of seeing the world, they're not defensive about their views, nor are they watching like a hawk, ready to pounce when you say something they disagree with. Zhuangzi sages do not engage in affirmations and denials like the Confucians and Mohists do. They are not lodged and constrained within a single perspective, nor do they seek to measure others by their lights. This means that the sage is not party to any Shi-Fei debating position, not seeking to affirm or deny views that align or disagree with their own. The hallmark of Zhuangzi sages is perspectival agility. They have the ability to move in and out of perspectives held by others, and they can do this not once, not twice, but any number of times. This phrase, perspectival agility, has been suggested by Sarah Flavel and Brad Hull, who use it to emphasize that taking on perspectives is a capacity. This is not the capacity to decide who is right on any given issue, but the capacity to rise above the hostility and defensive attitudes that tend to accompany any dispute where proponents of different views strive to prove the others wrong. For the Zhuangzi, this adversarial approach does not lead to clarity, as the later Mohists claimed. Rather, it trivializes even the most significant of questions, turning the quest to be a better person into an effort merely to get the better of one's opponent. This contrast between the Mohists and the Taoist teachings of the Zhuangzi tends to get less attention than the relationship between Taoism and Confucianism, but it will be well worth our time to look into it further, because, as we've already begun to suggest in this episode, some of the Zhuangzi's most distinctive teachings are about argumentation, reasoning, and language. So next time, we'll turn to an expert guest, Y. Chu, to learn more about the Zhuangzi's response to Mohism. There could be no better argument for joining us to hear the next episode of The History of Philosophy in China.